Hi everyone, and welcome back to another workshop. So today what we're going to do is have a bit of a look at a total daily energy expenditure. I'm just going to be doing a little bit of a talk on this with presentation just to give you guys some information on what this is and how it is going to be relevant to you. Okay, so without further ado, I will bring this up. Okay, so TDEE, if you see this anywhere, this means total daily energy expenditure. I'm going to run you through what that is. So this is the total amount of energy we use during a day. Essentially, everything that our body burns, calorie-wise in this case, is what we would refer to as total daily energy expenditure. So it's calculated using four different factors. So those factors are, firstly, your BMR. So we have spoken about this fairly regularly. You guys probably know what your BMR is. That's your basal metabolic rate. I'm going to go into a bit more detail on each of these in just a second. The second factor for our total daily energy expenditure is our exercise energy expenditure. So how much for exercise. After that, the thermic effect of feeding. And then lastly, our NEAT or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So from the top, first one, BMR, basal metabolic rate. So this is probably the one you're most familiar with when it comes to this sort of discussion. So your BMR is the amount of calories that your body needs to stay alive and to maintain your organ function at a resting state. So basically your minimum requirement to sustain you as you are, okay? So there are a few ways you can calculate this. Here's a couple of them. So firstly, to calculate your BMR very simply, you can take your weight and times by 20. Now, this is a very vague way of doing it. It should only be used as an approximate. I wouldn't use this as a very clear indicator of what your actual BMR is. You want to go into a bit more detail for a comprehensive one. So for a more detailed equation, you can use this. So for men, your weight times 10 plus your height times 6.25 minus your age times 5 plus 5. That will be approximately your BMR. So pretty much what you get out of that is going to be about right, okay? Of course, there's going to be some slight variances from person to person, but it's going to be pretty accurate and accurate enough for what we'd need it for. For women, the equation is very similar. So weight times 10 plus your height times 6.25 again, so all the same, minus age times 5, so that's all exactly the same as the male one, but we're going to minus 161. I'm sorry, ladies, that does mean that that's less included in the BMR for this one. So your base rate will be naturally lower than the males. But of course, everyone's BMR will be different depending on their personal situation. So weight times 10, height times 6.25, age times 5, and then you either plus 5 for males or you minus 161, and that should give you your BMR. Now, this will also calculate this on things like your body scan scales, but it is important to get those first couple of factors, or to get all three of them right. Age needs to be right too, but obviously your weight and height, you need to be as accurate as possible for your BMR to come back in that accurate way. All right, next of the 4 factors. So your exercise energy expenditure. So this is the amount of energy that we expend during exercise. Now, there isn't a simple answer for this one. There's so many variables that we take into account when it comes to this number of calories. I think with this one, this is actually very easy to overestimate how much we're doing. It's easy to overestimate how many calories you actually burn during exercise. It's probably not as much as some people would think, especially if you do track it on the phone or a watch. I don't often find them to be the most accurate way of tracking. It's good to give you a bit of a general idea, but I don't ever recommend basing your calorie deficit, if that's most likely the case where you will be trying to use this to your benefit. I wouldn't generally recommend basing that deficit with a huge number on this one. Okay, so the general range is probably from about 250 to 500 calories per hour. Now that is, once again, very vague, as there are many variables that could affect this. So things that may vary this outcome, they include, but they're absolutely not limited to just these. Exercise time, so how long you exercise for. So keep in mind that first part there, the general idea of 250 to 500 calories, that's per hour. And that's just a bit of a buffer window, depending on, once again, some of these factors. But keep in mind, if you do half an hour of training, you might only be burning up 100 calories. You know, there's so how long you exercise for is very important for this one. And on top of that, of course, your exercise intensity. So in this case, the intensity, we're referring to how hard you exercise, okay? So how much effort you are putting in. That can, again, vary quite a lot from person to person, from session to session. And then lastly, the exercise selection. So are you doing cardio? Are you doing weightlifting? Are you doing yoga? These all burn different amounts of energy. I'm not going to say one's harder than the other. Something like your cardio, for example, you will be most likely burning more calories at the time. However, when you do weightlifting, your body will actually quite often use up a lot more energy in the recovery from the weightlifting. So it's a bit simplistic to say to do one more so than the other, especially, once again, if you're after a calorie deficit. Often people do go straight to cardio, which is definitely encouraged. Like, I think that cardio can be very valuable for that, but our exercise energy expenditure is often a lot lower than we think. So I wouldn't just be slaving away at cardio in the hopes that that's going to lose weight. It's going to probably still not be that much without the good diet and nutrition plan. Okay, so those are three things to consider when you're trying to calculate this. And again, your watches, smartphones, things like that are tracking, they can give you a bit of an idea, but I wouldn't necessarily trust them 100%. Okay. Next one, the thermic effect of feeding. So this one you might not be as familiar with. So this is how much energy is required to digest the food that we're eating. So your thermic effect of feeding will be roughly 10% of your caloric intake for a day. So if you eat 2,000 calories, it'll roughly take around 200 calories to actually digest the food, to process it, and so forth. So it's worth considering. So of course, it's not an incentive to eat more just because you eat more, thinking that it's going to take more energy to burn it off. Not necessarily. It's still 10%, still 10%. So I wouldn't necessarily go down that path. In addition to this, however, there are certain foods with higher thermic effect. So broadly speaking, we'll have a look at the difference in the macronutrients. And within these, there are, again, certain foods that may be higher again in this thermic effect. But generally, they're going to fit in within these percentage ranges provided here. So our first and highest thermic effect, and this is why you'll quite often see it recommended in a lot of weight loss programs, as well as to maintain your muscle mass, but protein will actually have the highest thermic effect. So your protein provides you with 4 calories per gram. The thermic effect of that is approximately 20 to 30% of these calories. So for those 4 calories per gram, it will take up roughly 20 to 30% of those calories to actually digest, process, metabolize the food. This is quite important to remember, because even though it will make a small difference, having foods that will take more time to process and are harder to process can actually will help a little bit, once again, with working towards especially that calorie deficit. With most of these, as you can see, I'm mainly speaking in terms of deficits. When it comes to surplus, we of course are wanting to eat more calories than we're taking in. So it is good to know these things, but it's probably a little bit easier to kind of for a bit more trial and error with the surplus. Okay, so protein, 4 calories per gram. That thermic effect then is 20 to 30% of those calories. So the next one will be carbohydrates. So your carbs, once again, provide 4 calories per gram, and the thermic effect is approximately 5 to 15% of these calories. So again, for every 4 calories that you eat, that you take on board, approximately 5 to 15% of those calories will be going towards digesting that food. The last one, and the lowest thermic effect, is going to be your fats. So your fats, as well as being the lowest thermic effect, will also provide the highest amount of calories per gram. So the thermic effect of your fats is from 0 to 5% of those 9 calories. Now, of course, as the fats do provide more calories per gram, it can be a little bit misleading with that 0 to 5%. So a 5% of that 9, of course, could be higher than some of the, especially the carbs, depending on what type of carbs. And we can go into a bit more detail on that down the track, but this is just giving you a general idea. Now, again, the thermic effect of feeding, it's the same as the energy expenditure through the exercise. It's a little bit that's adding to the total package. Okay, so it's adding to your total daily energy expenditure, but we don't want to read too much into these ones, okay, because they can be so varied. We're generally kind of always go for sort of the minimum number that we think we'd be getting from them. I wouldn't go too crazy with trying to add up and try and squeeze those extra calories out. Okay, the last of the 4 is going to be your NEAT, or your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So this is the amount that we use in our everyday life outside of your exercise, eating, your BMR. So basically any activity that you do that isn't one of those things. So walking around the home, incidental exercise, they also call this. Cleaning, sitting at a desk, working in a labor field job. So these will also contribute to calories expended. Of course, the more active you are and the more incidental exercise you do, the higher your NEAT will be. So as with your exercise energy expenditure, there's no specific equation because everyone will be very different. It all comes down to the nature of your life and how sedentary or not that it is. So a small example may be, and you can, and obviously there's so many different work, lifestyle things that we all do differently. So take this as a bit of a vague answer, but a sedentary desk worker may burn up 200 calories per day just from their general activity, whereas someone working in construction or more labor field job may be around 500 calories per day. So the more active you are just generally in life, you will actually be burning some more calories. Okay, so let's have a look at some examples of your total daily energy expenditure in different people. So let's take the first example. We've got a 30-year-old female, 170 centimeters tall, weighs 80 kilos. I've just made this up, by the way. This is just to give you a bit of an idea. Has a desk job, 30 minutes of exercise per day on average, and there's no specific macro breakdown on her diet. So judging on these criteria, so if we were to look at her BMR. So firstly we'll do the weight. So the weight, so 80 times your 10, so 800. And then we're going to times her height by 6.25, or sorry if I write that properly. So plus 170 times 6.25, so 1862.5. And then we're going to minus her age times 5, so minus 30 times 5. And then lastly, as a female, we're going to minus 161, brings us to a BMR of 155, well, sorry, 1,551.5. I hope I said that correctly. I'm just going to round that down to 1,551. Okay. So on top of this, her energy expenditure, we're saying roughly 30 minutes of exercise per day. So we're going to give her 200 calories, okay? Because we're going to say she probably might train pretty hard. So she works hard when she's in the gym. She does roughly 30 minutes per day on average. Now that average could be broken up. She might do 4 hard sort of 45-minute, hour-long training sessions a week, and maybe on the other days might do a bit more of a gentle walk or some gentle cardio. So we'll call her 200 calories on average per day. Don't read, again, too much into these little extras. They are just extra bits that are adding up to the total, but we are not putting all our coins in those baskets, okay? The thermic effect of her food. Now she just has a pretty general diet. She sticks to just maintenance calories for the most part, doesn't have a specific carb, fat, protein high diet. It's a pretty even break. So we'll call it, 33% break across the board. Thermic effect of her food might add up to 150 calories per day. And lastly, she works a fairly sedentary job. So she's at a desk for the most part, moves around a little bit here and there, but not a huge amount throughout the day. So maybe she burn around 200 calories just from that type of lifestyle, and doesn't tend to do a huge amount of incidental exercise in between. So with these calculations, we can add up in total. So she's got her 51, so 1551 as a BMR. So that's a basal metabolic rate, the minimum that she'll require a day just to maintain her as she is. After that, and exercise on average 200 a day. She's going to also have the thermic effect of her food, 150, plus her NEAT, so her non-exercise activity, to 101 calories. That would equal her total daily energy expenditure. Now, let's have a look at an example of how vastly different these can be with two people. Now, of course, these people are fictional. They are very different. I've purposely made them fairly different so you can see the range that you might get from a total daily energy expenditure. But I think it works quite well to show that difference. Okay, let's have a look. So our next one, oh, there we go, is going to be a 40-year-old male. He is 180 centimeters tall, 105 kilograms, works as a builder. He does an average of an hour of hard exercise per day. So he goes to the gym, just smashes it out and trains hard pretty much every day of the week on top of his active job, which is helping him with the active job. If anyone is watching this as a builder, I think doing the gym work within reason, of course, is going to be beneficial to working quite a hard job. And then he eats a diet that is high in protein and carbs, okay? So his BMR, again, let's add this one up. So his weight, so 105 times 10, so 1,050. And then he's going to add his height, so 180 times 6.25. So height times 6.25, 2175, minus his age times 5, so 40 times 5 minus, and then we're going to add 5. So 1,980 calories is his BMR. On top of that, energy expenditure. So he trains hard, 1 hour, or on average, an hour of exercise every day, hard training, does some weights in the gym. We're going to say probably 500 calories a day on that one. He pushes as hard as he can every time. So 500 calories on average. The thermic effect of his food. Now this one, it can be a little bit different as he has a specific high protein, high carb diet, which is also going to be fueling that hard training. His thermic effect of feeding will be higher than the previous example. So we're going to say he's roughly 250 calories because he's eating high protein food. So remember that protein, 20 to 30% of your calories from protein are being used to actually process that food and to digest that food. The carbs are 5 to 15%. So a diet that's high in protein and carbohydrates, and this fictional character, he's obviously very into his training. He's works pretty hard as well at work, so he knows he needs those proteins and carbs. He knows he's picking ones that are going to provide more of that thermic effect. 250 calories approximately for the thermic effect of feeding. Lastly, his NEAT, so his non-exercise activity, thermogenesis. He works a pretty labor-filled day. Of course, it's not all day, every day. He's not constantly lifting, does have breaks, things like that. So we're going to call it 400 calories. Okay, so he does have a hard labor-filled job, but we're just going to err on the side of caution for this one, not overdo it. As I said, don't ever overdo these things, don't overestimate. Would rather be on the lower side and adjust upwards as we need to. So we're going to say 400 calories a day for his NEAT. So altogether 1980 from his BMR plus his 500 for his exercise, 250 from the food, and then 400 from his non-exercise activity. He will have a total daily energy expenditure of 3,130. As you can see, that is a huge difference between the two of them. Now, of course, there is a difference between the two of them. One's female, one's male. The gentleman he's taller, he's heavier, has a higher higher energy expenditure at the gym and when he's not at the gym because he's working a harder job, but also training for longer at the gym. So it's going to be a lot higher. But you can see just from these two examples how vastly different they can be. But they could also be very different with people that to the outside look quite similar, okay? So our total daily energy expenditure can vary from person to person. It's important to understand why some people do have a higher threshold for food than others. You know, we'll often people will be like, oh, you know, how come this person can do all this and get away with it? It's like we don't necessarily know all the ins and outs of their situation. So a lot of people may have a more active job than we perhaps think. They might train harder at the gym or with the exercise that they do. And also they might be eating a diet that's providing them with a higher thermic effect from their food. So things like the high protein diets would potentially do that, as opposed to a high fat diet, which might actually be really low. Okay, so a high fat or low protein more so could be a factor in that. So don't always judge it just on what you see on the surface. There could be a lot of factors at play. So you might be the same weight, height, and age, but you may have then still a very different total daily energy expenditure. So that BMR, the BMR could be pretty much the same, but then once we start to account for the other things, and yes, they are little things, but they do all add up in total, we could be a very, very different picture between two people that look quite similar on the surface. And so because of this, understand your own situation is important to formulate a more accurate plan for being in a calorie deficit or a calorie surplus. So here's some tips for accuracy. So on this one, we're going to say, don't overestimate your calories used. Now, this is very important. So the smartphones and the watches, they'll quite often be a bit inaccurate with their measure of the exercise you performed. If you're unsure on how much energy you've used, always err on the side of caution, okay? So the same goes for your NEAT and TEF, so your non-exercise activity and your thermic effect of food. If you're not sure, don't overestimate it, okay? Go think lower, and you can adjust it from there. Okay, so try not to read a huge, too much into that one. They will obviously be affecting your calorie needs, but try not to overestimate. I always think with these things, undercut yourself, and then adjust from there. Okay, so I think that's probably going to be the most sensible way. Otherwise, quite often we might be thinking that we've got more calories to take in than we actually do need. And of course, if we're eating more than we put out, then that's going to result in fat gain and weight gain. Okay. So if you're attempting a deficit or a surplus, make sure to give it time to work. So when even as we are judging this from a more nutrition standpoint with this little workshop today, the main things to take into account is once we've got this figure and we've been as accurate as possible, it might take you a few weeks before you see the results of working towards your target. I'm going to give you an idea for the target in just a second, but you need to give it time to work. Okay, so track your measurements and your weight regularly. Look for a trend rather than an immediate result. So what I mean by that is you might weigh in every day, you might do morning and night for the whole week. You might average it out. You might take a measurement every week for a month. You might take the average of that. Okay, so make sure you're looking for trends in the changes. So that could be a trend in a weight loss or weight gain, fat loss, fat gain, fat loss, muscle gain, whatever it is you're after. Look for a trend rather than an immediate result. Okay. And then lastly, so a general rule of thumb. Now, of course, you need to, if you want to be as accurate as possible, we need to make this more as relevant to you and your circumstances as we can. But the general rule of thumb for calculating your deficit or your surplus, if you do want to, if you're looking at fat loss, I would be basing it roughly off your total daily energy expenditure minus 500 calories. Okay, if you're looking to be in a surplus where you want to muscle gain, obviously you're training hard at the gym, but then you're probably taking your energy expenditure and you're adding 500 calories to that. So deficit will take 500 off, surplus will add 500. But again, seek a more accurate measurement dependent on your circumstances that's more relevant to you. Okay, like this is a very, very vague amount for calculating the deficit or surplus, but it's a good starting point. If you really don't know where to start and you haven't really looked into this as a whole before, I would say that this is a good idea. Okay, so let's have a look at what that might mean for the previous examples. So if I just flick back, oh, sorry, gone the wrong way. Here we go. So let's take our first lady. So her total daily was 2101. That's her energy expenditure. So if she wanted to be in a deficit, we would be looking at least starting her 1600 calorie a day diet, and that would, I would imagine actually that would be probably a little bit of room for movement on there, but it's going to be sitting slightly above her BMR. So she's getting all her base needs. That's excellent. But then we are in that circumstances starting to get the benefit from things like the exercise and the firming effect of the food. So 1600 would be a rough starting point for her. And if she did want to go to a bit of muscle gain, she might even be looking at adding 500 on, so 2600 calories for a potential surplus. But again, you would adjust that. We'd look for the trend and we would adjust it as necessary. For the gentleman, so he'd be starting at 3130, and if we wanted to look at a deficit, 2630, so roughly 2600, which for his details, that sounds like it probably would be about right. I'd probably personally, I would probably bring it down a little bit lower again. Trying to bring it closer to his BMR at least to start with, and then start to bulk them back up again after he's lost a bit of the initial weight. But that's again a good starting point. 26. Take that 500 off the total daily energy expenditure. See how that goes. Look for a trend. Remember, we want steady weight loss. We don't want to be necessarily just do a real quick blast and then put it back on in the couple of months afterwards. So 2600 for this gentleman with these in his situation, I think that sounds fine. Honestly, I think that working a labor field job and exercising hard every day, high protein, high carbs, I think that's going to be a pretty good take. Again, if he's looking to add on some muscle, he'd probably go up to about 3600, so 3630 for his calories. And once again, look for the trend. Okay, so hopefully, guys, that should give you a bit of an idea of what total daily energy expenditure is, and we're going to try and to send out a few more of these videos. I'm going to be trying to put a new workshop up every week. Hopefully this one has given you some interesting information about what actually goes into your calorie needs per day and how that can change your results through your weight loss or muscle gain, whatever you're looking to do. Okay, so I hope that it's been helpful. If you do have any questions, please feel free to get in touch. You can message us on Instagram, Facebook, or you can email us info@summitgym.com.au, and we can answer any specifics that you have. So guys, after that one, I'm going to wrap it up from there. Thanks for watching. Appreciate your time. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you on the next video. Thanks, guys.